Welcome to Long or Short Podcast. We're back here today with a new guest. I'm sat here today with my friend Advait Kuravi, who in his school times was a very curious lad. You know, got involved in a lot of different activities at school, including founding the Sustainability Society and also having created the Political Awareness Week at our school, as he, since a young age, has been very interested in politics. He studies politics at LSE, and he is currently the conference director for the LSE Model UN conference, and is also involved as vice president for the Non-Law and Law Society. This summer, he'll be joining Linklaters for a summer vacation scheme in commercial law, and I'm sat here today in sunny Birmingham. How are you, Advait?
Well, the pleasure is all mine, Pratham. It's great to be here, and I couldn't be more excited to help your guests out. I hope this will be somewhat enriching. I'll do my best.
So the first question I want to ask, Advait, is on a personal level, I want to get into the reasons behind you are the way you are. So starting from when you were in school, what the sort of the experiences that sort of shape the way you are. You know, you're very curious. You really want to, make an impact with a sustainable society at the school. And now you even ran for the student union at LSE for the president. You always put yourself out there. So talk to me a bit about your background and how it's shaped you.
Phenomenal. That's a great question, Pratham. Well, looking back to it, I think there have been two formative moments in my life. I wasn't always as proactive as I am now. Growing up in primary school, the first couple of years of secondary school, I wasn't the most sociable person. I was mindlessly trotting the well-trodden path of medicine, as my parents had insisted upon. But it was when Brexit came along that I realized just how much influence politicians, for the better or for the ill, could have. And I realized that I was interested in more than being a cog in the machine. I really wanted to try and make a difference. And I found my calling then and there to be politics. And the second reason, Pratham, is in year 10, I had a substitute teacher, and his name was Mr. Butler, and I'm happy to shout him out. And Mr. Butler, rather than teaching the prescribed materials, went off on a digression about climate change. And it was then and there that I realized how urgent and severe the climate crisis was, and the fact that it had already been happening, and the fact of the matter is that 2 million lives are claimed each year by air pollution. Now, that's a big deal. Now think about the whole scope of climate change, and those are monumental impacts. So it is partly because of Brexit that changed my mindset, and also sustainability that I've pursued understanding the world as it is, which is why I've studied politics at university.
I think 100%, that makes a lot of sense. And today when you see different around the globe, different places such as Delhi, where the pollution is terrible, going outside, I think there was a stat, it's something about like 10 cigarettes, the equivalent of air pollution for a person to inhale is about 10 cigarettes a day. I'm not too sure on that stat, but I think it was along the lines of that seriousness. However, it's interesting to see how people like Trump, and they're very pro-oil and pro-manufacturing sort of policies where they want to sort of disregard the climate change that's going on around us. I really want to get into sort of the psychology behind why he does what he does, and whether you think there's any validity in what he's got to say.
Well, firstly, with regard to the climate crisis, I think Trump is going to stymie progress, but it's not an unmitigated disaster for three reasons. First of all, Trump has undone a lot of Biden-era legislation that sought to increase upstream costs on oil and gas projects. For example, when we think about emissions taxation or the moratorium on liquefied natural gas terminals, all of those inhibitors upstream have been repealed by Trump, which paves the way for more oil and gas projects. But on the other hand, Trump's planning liberalization reforms, I think that's also going to herald good news for green projects too. So, but the third and most important aspect is that although the government introduces regulation that shifts the balance of costs, what delivers projects is capital and finance. And at present, renewable energy is on the cheaper end. Solar power in many states with good solar resources is cheaper than oil and gas. In the UK, the market has organically led to mass adoption of offshore wind. So I think that Trump has slowed progress by changing the incentives, but I don't think that it's a disaster by any means. I think the arc of history will tend towards climate action.
On the topic of his recent tariffs, I think a lot of people, I just see all the memes online. People are a lot of people are antagonizing him for saying that, oh, from now on, there will be no option but to celebrate because everything's going to be green, everything's going to be happy, there's going to be so much progress. However, looking at the stock market and how I think this S&P is dropped by a total of 13%, isn't it?
Yeah.
Roughly over the last month, and obviously it's for the cause of globalization, or anti-globalization, for Trump, wanting to make America sort of individual in sort of their stance as a country, so they can support like local businesses. However, it's had the opposite impact. What is your thoughts on sort of where he's trying to go with this?
See, this is really interesting because the whole narrative leading up to the imposition of tariffs has been ambivalent and muddy. Trump's Treasury Secretary is by no means a tariff devotee. There was a doctrinaire tariff supporter that he could have appointed, but he chose not to. And that suggested that tariffs are more a pragmatic tool of realpolitik, a bargaining chip, if you will, more than anything else. Similarly, when it came to tariffs on Canada and Mexico, he imposed them, repealed them, imposed them, repealed. So we didn't really know what he was thinking at any point. And Trump's his rhetoric doesn't really match up to the substance of his policies. So he argued in favor of reciprocal tariffs, that the US was going to charge other countries what they charged the US, so that the US wasn't being, quote-unquote, exploited by other countries. But let's take a look at what he's done. So he's introduced a baseline of 10% tariffs on everybody, even if the trading counterpart doesn't impose tariffs. That's hardly reciprocal. I think that's unwarranted. Secondly, when you take a look at his tariff formula, it is mind-boggling to economists. I'm no expert myself, but reading the Financial Times, The Economist, it's as follows. So it's the balance of trading goods divided by net imports, divided by the value of imports, divided by 2, which really has nothing to do with the tariff level of the trading counterpart. It's all to do with, well, I couldn't really put my finger on it, but yeah, there's the calculation. Nobody really seems to understand what's going on. But I think the overall impact of this is it's going to lead to a domestication of supply chains. I think it's going to prove to be a hurdle to globalization because base tariff rates around the world are now 22%. That is the highest they have been since World War II. So this is a really big deal. When we take a look back throughout history, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, when we take a look at the McKinley Tariff Acts towards the turn of the 20th century, those really did stymie global trade. And I think Trump's tariff introduction is going to serve as a historical phenomenon of the magnitude of Hawley-Smoot and of the magnitude of the McKinley tariffs.
I think a lot of people base their opinions, and it's not antagonizing anyone, but a lot of people don't do their research or try and look into it deeper before they make their opinions, especially with politics. And I think they obviously have a right to do that. And but with politics being so sort of polarized between different people, what would you say to a current person who's, let's say, 13 years old, looking online and seeing these different political opinions? What should they base their opinions on? Because a lot of people take it as quite salary and like quite surface level. So what would you tell a 13-year-old boy?
You're right. Well, a couple of stats just to paint the picture. First of all, misinformation spreads far faster than truth because misinformation is more newsworthy and more scandalous. Secondly, young boys and girls, in fact, sorry,
Of course.
slip of the tongue. Young people tend to derive the vast majority of their media from social media, which is not fact-checked. And thirdly, fact-checking, at least by organizations like For Fact, doesn't really seem to work. And this is the problem, because as a democracy, the entire point is rational discourse. And for that to take place as a political community, we need to have a common baseline of fact. The moment we cease to have a common baseline of fact, that's when partisanship retrenches, that's when polarization happens, and that's when we can't find a middle ground. And that is what is happening in America. And that has profound consequences for the functioning of government. The American system is fundamentally based on consensus. An example of that is the filibuster provisions in the Senate. For any bill to go through Congress, it needs to be passed by the House of Representatives and needs to be passed by the Senate. But for it to go through the Senate, it needs to pass a 2/3 majority vote called a filibuster. Now, hardly anything has gone through Congress over the last decade. When you take a look at the number of laws passed, it's plummeted because the system is predicated upon consensus and there is no consensus. The UK situation is a bit different, but that is the fundamental problem.
Would you say it's sort of derived from sort of the American system, you know? A president comes in for 4 years.
Yeah.
And then they have a chance again for another 4 years. And that's it. They're in for a total of 4 years.
Yeah.
4-year sections. And about 3 years of that is trying to gain popularity. And so there's not much leeway for them to actually concentrate on what's at hand.
Yeah.
And this, I think, is a huge problem because, as you said, a lot of the policies don't get sort of put into practice. You know, Trump says a lot of things. However, the team behind him and Congress and getting everyone on board is like so much more difficult. And I feel like it just creates a system where nothing really gets done quick enough.
Absolutely. I mean, sure, presidents are elected every 4 years, but not to mention, delegates of the House of Representatives are elected every 2 years, believe it or not. So that breeds short-termism. And these House of Representative elections have a profound effect on the legislature. Take a look at Obama, for example. After the 2010 election, he was pretty much a lame duck. He couldn't do anything and he ruled through executive orders. So, yes, politicians in the US have to be short-termist. But the same is also true of the UK, don't forget.
Yeah.
100%. Take a look at our infrastructure projects. I mean, I think a case in point is probably the Cameron government. To pursue austerity, they took money out of capital expenditure for the NHS, which is, building hospitals and infrastructure that improves productivity in the long term. And instead they put it into current expenditure, essentially putting a plaster on an axe wound to try and keep the NHS's head above water. Now, the result of that has been a stagnation in productivity for the NHS. And the result of that has been that the NHS is now more expensive than ever. It's unproductive. And we still haven't increased capital spending. So, yes, I think there definitely is a problem of short-termism. And the same is true of social care. Like, nothing has happened on the social care front for a decade now. Our system is fragmented. We don't have a centralized provision.
I think that leads smoothly onto the point of, do you think the UK is going downhill? Because, by the way, I conducted a survey. About 33 votes came in.
Yeah.
Do you want to know the percentage of people who said no? The UK is
So let's take a guess.
Yeah.
Was it 80?
92.
92.
I got quite a lot of feedback. A lot of people talking about their different ideas of how, especially in the UK, we can see the happiness index going lower and lower over the past few years.
Yeah.
And if you look at the highest, it's like, for example, Taiwan has one of the highest happiness indexes. So what is your opinion on the UK? Is it going downhill? And why?
Well, let's break that down. So let's disentangle the economy from geopolitics, from the military. Right. So first of all, when it comes to the economy, let's take a look at the broader picture as opposed to just GDP. So household incomes for everybody but the top quintile of people has stagnated since the 1980s. That's partly why there's so much malaise and dissatisfaction. So that is a scathing indictment. Secondly, public sector productivity has stagnated. Our productivity rates as an economy are lower than our counterparts in Germany and France. And part of the reason for that is underinvestment in productive capital like infrastructure. And everyone is leaving the London Stock Exchange.
Yeah.
In fact, even Glencore, the mining company, are thinking of delisting. Arm, the biotech company from Cambridge, they conducted their IPO in the US. So that doesn't paint a very good picture. So I think for the moment, it's not looking great. No. Let's also think about the US in the midst of a storm, in that the US is retrenching and it's becoming more protectionist, and we've left the European Union. Now, the idea behind leaving the European Union is that we could seek trade partners elsewhere. What's happening now is a surge of protectionism, and as a vulnerable economy, it's going to be tricky because we're liable to be buffeted by international trade trends. So I think for the moment, it's not looking great. We need to improve our productivity, we need to improve inequality, and we need to improve the functioning of our public sector.
So looking at the differences between the UK and the US,
Yeah.
why do you think the UK is underperforming so much in terms of the growth of their GDP? Because, well, I guess in December 2024 they experienced a 0.1% increase in GDP, and previous before then it was negative as well.
Yeah.
Whereas in the US, the S&P was performing very well due to obviously a lot of the tech companies.
Yeah.
There's a lot more innovation in them.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
And I think that a previous someone I spoke to mentioned that it was because of the mindset differences between the UK and the US. From his point of view, he said the US had a lot more of the American dream in them in terms of the way they sort of acted. They have more passion for innovating and creating productivity and revenue, whereas the UK, it's coming from the fact that the UK, there's just lower morale in general.
Yeah.
Well, what are your opinions on the differences between, I guess, the culture?
Yeah. And there's a self-reinforcing cycle.
Yeah.
When people are optimistic, they invest. When people are pessimistic, we get guilt yields of 4.5% in the UK.
Yeah.
Because people didn't think that we're going to pay it back. Now, the number one job for graduates of elite American universities, Stanford, Princeton, Harvard, that's going into high-performing, innovative industries like tech. That's founding their own startups. Number one job for British uni students, it's security, it's law, it's investment banking, it's big institutions. There definitely isn't as much of a startup culture. I think for a couple of reasons. First of all, that optimism point. the American economy is growing by leaps and bounds. I don't think it's even comparable anymore. Let's stop comparing Britain to the US. There's no point. By every conceivable metric of productivity, innovation, and growth, they are wiping the floor with us. Like standards of living, that's a different point entirely, but I'm just talking purely about economic growth. Secondly, I think there are far deeper pools of capital in the US, both venture capital and private equity. And I think both, there is an interplay with each other. As I said earlier, there's a self-reinforcing cycle. So that's my take on the culture difference between American and British universities.
100%. I think you can see sort of the differences in government in terms of background. Keir Starmer comes from a law background, and then now you have DOG, which is obviously entrepreneurs. You know, you have Elon Musk leading that front, alongside Trump, and so it's like the differences in government sort of set out the policies and the level of productivity they want for their country. So what are your opinions on Keir Starmer? Do you think he's a good leader for the UK at the moment in this current climate?
I don't know. We pointed towards Doge, and as much as I may object to the way in which they're going about their business, I think it's indisputable that the public sector across the US and the UK needs to be more productive and less wasteful. And this isn't a controversial opinion in the slightest. Even Keir Starmer, a Labour Prime Minister, has weighed in behind this efficiency argument. Dominic Cummings wasn't alone. He may have gone about it the wrong way. Keir Starmer has abolished NHS England, lest we forget. He's introduced restrictions on how consultants can be used by public sector bodies. So I think the same problem has been identified here too. Sorry, what was your question? Could you repeat it very quickly?
So So I guess in conclusion, what are your thoughts on Keir Starmer?
It's a very tricky question. I think a couple of points to note. Firstly, he seems to have a dual mandate. Number one, that's fixing the public sector and rectifying the holes in the public finances. And number two, that's improving productivity. On one hand, he's increased taxes, national insurance, VAT on private schools, carried interest for private equity, and cutting spending on disability benefits, for example. That's all in an effort to balance the books. On the other hand, he is trying to improve growth in that his tax rises on carried interest of private equity, that was worked out with industry to reduce the impact on private equity. His workers' rights bill was moderated to reduce the impact for businesses and for unemployment. So in whatever he's doing, he's really trying to moderate his stance to avoid impairing economic growth. But it's a really tricky balance to strike.
I think a lot of people don't understand the level of stress or the level of responsibility a leader has, especially of the whole country. You know, you can say, he said this, he said that, he's done this policy, it hasn't gone well, the S&P's dropped, he's done this, but it's like most people in that position would crumble. And the fact that you have leaders who go in and out day by day, trying to improve, whatever their intentions, you're right. You know, we're all human beings, like, generally have a general urge to conquer, to go out there and, you know, do, like, venture into this, venture into that, get more and more powerful, you know, or not powerful, but more accumulative of wealth or a lot of things, of status. So I guess that ties into politics itself. Yeah. Do you think the system of politics is, I guess this is a very hard question to answer, do you think it's a beneficial sort of system to make sure that countries are led ethically and in the right way, so that there's social, so that social welfare all over the globe is to a good level?
Well, when we take a look at people's affiliation towards democracy, their affinity has fallen off a cliff, particularly for young people. People don't really understand the value of democracy, and support for authoritarianism is climbing up. Now, I'm really not sold on this idea of a benevolent dictatorship, because absolute power corrupts absolutely. It's inevitable.
Yeah.
And there is the old saying that a famine has never happened in a democracy, because politicians have to be responsive to the interests of the people. Authoritarianism inevitably insulates politicians and leads to poor, inefficient decisions. But I think a legitimate criticism of our political and electoral system is that it's first past the post and it's unrepresentative. And this most recent election was one of the most unrepresentative in history.
What is the one thing you would like to go over from your experience at LSE that shaped the way you think about the future?
That's a great question. I've been involved in a lot of things, from Model United Nations to fundraising to student union elections, but I'd say the number one most formative experience was running for president of the student union, for two reasons. Firstly, it teaches you the dark arts of high politics, in that it's a tricky game. You've got to win people over, you've got to be charming, you've got to be relentless, and you've got to make friends with the right people. But you've got to keep your morals in mind. So sometimes you have to get your hands dirty, but for the sake of a higher purpose. And that's a tricky balance to strike. The second thing it taught me is that no matter how well-intentioned you are, when you put yourself out there and when you come out strong and nail all colors to the mast, some people are not going to like you. And they will find a reason not to like you. Whether that's envy and they're projecting, or whether they disagree with your policy platform, if people don't like you, you aren't putting yourself out there enough. Unless they're legitimate criticisms and you're being a bit of a knucklehead. And the third thing it taught me is how to deal with failure. Because I was unsuccessful. I got 1,000 votes and my opponent got a bit more than that. I was just narrowly pipped to the post. And there were a whole load of factors that played into it. But ultimately, two things. First of all, I could rest assured that I put my best foot forward. And I made the right decisions in good faith based on the incomplete information I had at the time. And in life, you're always going to be faced with incomplete information. And in hindsight is always a virtue. You've got to do the right thing at that time. And don't blame yourself for that, even if new information comes by down the line. And secondly, it taught me to keep a growth mindset close to heart. No matter how tough things get, don't let failure get to your heart. Don't let success get to your head. Use everything as a learning opportunity and keep on plodding along, because you may have won a battle, but you've got a war to go.
Failure is what builds us. Failure is what shapes our actions and what we do,